Hello everyone. I'm back with what I hope is a short little video for you. The other day you were working on reviewing adding and subtracting fractions. Now I know many of you have added and subtracted fractions, probably 4th and 5th grade, but I needed to review that with you because we are going to continue to work on all operations with fractions here this last week before break. And then once we get back from break, we need to work in some integers with those. So I needed to make sure you knew how to do fractions without the integers before we add those in. So that's why you worked on reviewing adding and subtracting yesterday. I want to show you one little thing here today about subtracting fractions that you may or may not be aware of. So our goal today, it says, is how can renaming fractions be used to help subtract fraction? So there's a word in there called renaming that we're going to focus on today. And you may or may not know what that is, but it will be explained a little bit later. So let's focus on this problem. 5 1/4 minus 2 4/6. Okay, so as you know, in order to subtract fractions, we need to have a common denominator. And we don't have one here, 6 and 4. So we need to find a multiple that they share in common. Okay, so 6 and 4. You could list your multiples of 4. 4 times 1 is 4, times 2 is 8, and so forth. And the same of 12 till you find one, the same of 6 until you find one they have in common. And they actually have 12 in common. That's the smallest one. Now there's other numbers they have in common. Maybe you found 24, maybe you found 36, that's fine. But I advise you as much as possible, find the smallest one, because it'll save you some reducing at the end. It'll give you smaller numbers to use. But if you used another one, that's fine also. Okay, so 4 times what is 12? Well, we multiply by 3 to get 12. So I need to do the same thing to the top. So if I do the same thing to the top, 1 times 3 is 3. Okay, so let's go down here. 6 times 2 is 12. So if I multiply the top times 2, that makes this 8. Now, in a normal addition or subtraction problem, as you did yesterday, we would just do the operation here, which is subtract. I mean, our new problem is 5 3/12 minus 2 8/12. But I have a problem here. I can't subtract. And this is where the renaming term here comes into play. So our first half of this period is going to be focused on renaming. Okay, so I'm going to pause this problem here and we're going to come back to this. Okay, so let's take a fraction like 4 1/3. Okay, renaming means another way of writing this fraction. We need to come up with another way to write a fraction that equals 4 1/3. Right? So one way to do this is to borrow. So we're going to borrow a whole from our whole number here, like you would in normal subtraction. We're going to borrow one whole. Now, I can't just lose that whole. I have to put that whole somewhere. So 1 whole would also be 3/3. Right? 1 whole is 3/3. So if you add these two together, that totals 4/3. So 4 1/3 also equals 3, and if we add those together, 4/3. Those are the same thing. Think about it. This is an improper fraction. This improper fraction is worth 1 1/3, right? If you change that, plus the 3 gives you the 4 3/3 that we started with. Okay? So another way to write this. So think about what we did here. We took 1 away from the whole number. We kept the same denominator and we made it worth 1 whole. So 3/3 here. And then when we added that, we got 4/3. Okay, let's look at some more that are like this. Okay, so we're going to practice renaming these here a little bit. So again, let's think back to what I did. I need to change 8 2/4 into another fraction, but it still has to be equal to 8 2/4. So we're going to borrow 1 from the whole number. We're borrowing a whole. So 8 becomes 7. So I know I have 7 wholes. Now I need to add 1 whole to this one. So by keeping the same denominator, in order to make it equal to a whole, I need to add 4/4. And then if you add those together, you get 6/4. Again, you can check yourself. 6/4, right, would be 1 2/4. And then this 1 plus our 7 gives you the 8 2/4 you started with. Okay, looking at this one. Borrow 1 from your whole number, so it becomes 4. I borrowed 1 whole, I need to add a whole. So using our denominator of 7, we would add 7/7, which becomes 10/7. These are equivalent fractions, guys. We're not changing the value, we're just rewriting it. Okay, let's look at the last one. In the last problem, we have 7 5/6. So let's rewrite this one. 7, if you take 1 away, your whole number is now 6. Right? If I add 1 whole here, bottom number stays the same. So this is still 6. 6, 6. So if you add this together, you get 11. That's not a very good 11, sorry. 11/6. So that's how we rename fractions. Now you may ask yourself, why are we renaming? Well, it's going to become very useful to us when we cannot subtract, as in that first problem I showed you. So let's go back to that problem. Okay, if you remember in this problem, we found the common denominator and we got this far and we could not subtract. So this is where renaming comes in. If you ever cannot subtract, we use this process. I borrow 1 from the whole number. My denominator is 12. That's the common denominator you found. So you're going to add 12/12 to this. Right? So the new fraction is 4 15/12. Now, if you look, we should be able to subtract. So subtract your whole numbers. 4 minus 2 is 2. Bottom number stays at 12. And when you subtract the numerators, 15 minus 8 is 7. If we look at that answer, it's not improper, and we cannot reduce it. So we are done. That is final. That's where the process of renaming comes in. Okay, let's work our way through another problem. Now, we don't know if we need to rename or not. You will not know until you find a common denominator. So that has to come first. So, okay, our denominators are 5 and 8. So common denominator is probably 40. So let's set both of these fractions equal to 40 before we do anything else. Okay, now we need to change the numerator. 5 times 8 is 40. So I also need to multiply by 8 up here. So that makes my numerator 16. 8 times 5 is 40. So I need to multiply by 5 here. And 6 times 5 is 30. Okay, so now we would subtract, because it's a subtraction problem. And we're in another situation where we cannot subtract. So we need to rename. Only rename when you can't subtract. So let's do this. Borrow 1 from the 6, which is a 5, right? So I am going to add 1 whole, which our denominator is 40. So I'm going to add 40/40 to this. And let's see what we get. Well, 40 plus 16, I get 56/40. And if we look down below, I think we find that we are now able to subtract. Right? So 56 minus 30, you would get 24. Or sorry, you'll get 26/40. which are even numbers and can be reduced, right? It's not improper, but it can be reduced. If I divide by 2, I'll get 13 over 20. And then don't forget, we need to go back and subtract our whole numbers. The new whole number of 5 minus 3. Let me see if I can squeeze a 2 in there. So 2 and 13/20 is your final answer. Okay, so in the problems yesterday, you didn't need to rename, and that's perfectly fine. But in the event that you can't subtract, this is how you would handle it. Okay, I want to show you one last problem here. Okay, let's look at this problem. It looks a little different because it says 12 wholes minus 5 4/9. So as you notice, this does not have a fraction here. But if we use renaming, we should be able to make it into a fraction. We need to make a whole number and a fraction that totals 12. Well, we could do that by borrowing from the 12. If I borrow 1 and make this 11, now in here, in my fraction, I need to make a fraction that's worth 1 whole, because this 1 plus 11 totals the 12 we started with. Now, we could make anything that equals 1 whole. 2 over 2, 3 over 3, 4 over 4. But my suggestion is, to save yourself a little work, use the common denominator that's already there. So let's use the bottom number of 9. And then in order to make that 1 whole, we need to use 9 over 9. Right? That saved us some work because now you don't have to find a common denominator. And we can subtract. So my whole numbers, 11 minus 5 is 6. My bottom number of 9 stays. And then if you subtract your numerators, 9 minus 4 is 5. So let's check. Well, it's not improper, and I can't reduce it. So that's my final answer. This is another version of renaming, where we borrowed 1 and filled in 1 whole here. Okay? So please remember, you do not need to rename every time you do subtraction. Find your common denominator first, and if you can't subtract, then yes, you're going to have to use rename. Use this borrowing method we talked about. Okay? All right, you do have a practice assignment. Please work hard on that. Show me your work and message me with any questions. Have a great afternoon, guys.